After studying this module, you shall be able to know about the forensic anthropology, history of forensic anthropology, scope and importance of forensic anthropology, and the various case studies. Anthropology is the scientific study of the origin, the behavior, and the physical, social, and cultural development of humans. Anthropologists seek to understand what makes us human by studying the human ancestors through archaeological excavation and by observing living culture throughout the world. In short, anthropologists of one kind or another are liable to investigate almost everything about human being, our evolution, our genes, our emotions, our behaviors, how people organize their living or languages, our religion, our behaviors, and so forth. A good way to emphasize anthropology's broad scope is to say anthropologists are interested in all human beings, whether living or dead, ancient or African or European, and that anthropologists are interested in many different aspects of humans, including their technologies, family lives, political system, religion, and languages. No place or time is too remote to escape the notice of anthropologists. Now, let us learn about forensic anthropology. Forensic anthropology is defined as the application of science of physical anthropology in the legal process. The routine scope of the discipline in the identification of skeletonized, badly decomposed or otherwise unidentified human remains. Usually, forensic anthropologists are involved in identification of living person, which is defined as the determination of a unique personality on the basis of entirely of characteristics distinguishing him or her from the other person. Identification problems are important for legal and humanitarian reasons in solving criminal cases, problems of inheritance, marital status, etc. Identification is more often problematic forensic cases because the next of kin may not be available to view the body injury, dismemberment, and or post-mortal changes that exacerbate emotional response, or other obscure identifying features may make visual identification or use of other techniques such as the fingerprints unreliable or impossible. Positive entails establishing identifying features may make visual identification or use of other techniques such as the fingerprint unreliable or impossible. Forensic taphonomy is subfield of forensic anthropology which indulge in examination of how taphonic forces have altered the evidences, which is the subject of medico-legal investigation. It examines the pattern of decomposition and destruction of the hard and soft tissue, which is known as determination of time since death. There are some factors which interferes with the examination of time since death, such as the environmental factors are external variable such as climatic, that is abiotic, and animals, that is the biotic one. Individual factors are also included that brings the subject to the decomposition process themselves, such as the body size, age of deceased. Now, let us see the history of forensic anthropology. The history of forensic anthropology extends back to the 19th when anatomists and physical anthropologists were occasionally asked to provide their assistance in human identification. In 1895, Mathieu Orfil, a French expert of forensic medicine, published a textbook containing the data on measurements of arm bones and sex differences. Then Erold in 1889 was the first who elaborated the tables for males and females ratio reconstruction from the bone length. Bertillon proposed an anthropometric system of adult individuals for personal identification in around 1885 that relied on taking the measurements of bony parts, including the measurements of human ear, that was later abandoned in favor of fingerprinting. In the period between First and Second World Wars, the numerous work dedicated to a particular aspect of forensic osteology were published. Some of them still are in use today. That is the T.W. Todd's in 1920s work on pubic symphysis. Now, let us see the scope of forensic anthropology. The scope of forensic anthropology is extensive and increasing every day. It includes the collection, preservation and analysis of human skeletal remains for identification and reconstruction of the events surrounding the death of an individual. Many killers are used for dumping the dead bodies of their victims in the remote sites, means that most often the police to have skeletal remains to aid in investigation. It is then left to the forensic anthropologist to use this fleshly evidence to shed some light on the case with the expertise. The forensic anthropologist is responsible for addressing a number of questions such as, is the material bone? Is the bone human or non-human? What is the prevention of remains? Are the remains of forensic significance? How many individuals are present? What is the ancestry of the individuals? What is the sex of the individual? What is the age of individual? What is the stature of individual? Are there any individualizing characteristics? If there evidence of trauma or pathology. Now, let us see importance of forensic anthropology. Determination of species. The bones should be sorted out into human and non-human bones. Then the next we have is determination of age. The appearance of union of centers of bones, the growth of certain changes in the bones and teeth helps the investigator in determining the age of individual at the time of death. Then we have determination of sex. The adult skeleton has several morphological differences between the different sexes which are utilized to determine the sex of the individual. Next we have is determination of race. Bones have certain morphological characteristics which are confined to individual of a particular race. Based on these, the racial group to which the individual belongs can be arrived. Next we have is the height. The height of the individual can be calculated with reasonable accuracy by applying formula to the length of the individual bone, especially the long bones of limb. Now let us see the case study. In early April 1997, shots rang out from a quiet rural area of upstate New York. A man attacked his daughter in their house and shot at her with a shotgun. The woman was able to get her ear and attempted to drive away, but the man caught up to her and shot her once through the car door, fatally wounding her. In the meantime, the woman's brother ran to a neighbor's house and called police. The man ran into woods behind his house and despite a massive manhunt was not seen again. This case becoming something of a legend in the region given the notoriety of the missing suspect. Marty Miller, a tall man known for his quick temper and flair for bar fights, the community was also aware of his family situation. Marty's daughter was also his common law wife and Marty had 3 more children with her. The death of his daughter was mourned in the community, but there are also feelings of apprehension. Marty was an avid outdoorsman and knew how to survive in the forest. As a fugitive, Marty could be quite dangerous and people feared where and when he might reappear. As time went on, Marty even became a bit of a bogeyman, since parents told their children not to go too deep and forest because Marty will get you. 4 years passed without any word or sign of Marty, and the case had gone to a cold. This changed on December 8, 2001, when a hunter phoned the local sheriff and stated that he had found a human skeleton. Hunters often find missing people, given that they visit remote areas that are relatively untouched much of the year, except for the hunters and the people who wish to hide human remains. The New York State Police were called to investigate the scene, and they asked Stedman to help with the recovery and identification of the skeleton. The remains were on the ground under a great deal of leaf litter. Once the leaves had been cleared, the remains and associated evidences could be seen. The skeleton was fully clothed in a black jacketed jeans, leather belt, boots. A shotgun led along the left side of the body, and the shotgun shells were between the legs. Personal effects located around the body included the eyeglasses with broken lenses, a wristwatch, a partial pack of cigarettes, and a wooden pipe. The skeleton was lying supine next to a tree, though the upper half of the body was twisted to the left such that the bone arms were on the left side of the bone. The hands were disarticulated and the lower arm bones were bleached white by the sun, where they extended from the coat sleeves. The skull was highly fragmented and small pieces were found all over the body. Some of the bones were transported away from the body by animals. The sacrum was found approximately 50 feet away, while the right oscosa was recovered approximately 42 feet from the skeleton in the opposite direction. The left oscosa and the right femur were not recovered, although a wallet was found in the pants pocket and contained multiple forms of identification with same name, Martin Miller. Wallets are transferable and thus not an adequate means of positive identification. Instead, a biological identification of the skeletal remains were necessary. The remains were transported to the Forensic Anthropology Laboratory at Binghamton University that night, and analysis began the following morning. The method utilized in forensic anthropological analysis require an understanding of the basic principles of skeleton biology that are at very foundation of the discipline. A foundation in skeletal biology despite the far-reaching application of modern forensic anthropology. All the underlying methods and theories in the field are well grounded in the principle of skeleton biology. The study of development, anatomy, physiology, histology, and biomechanics of bone tissue. The human skeleton is typically divided into the axial skeleton comprising of head, thorax, and pelvis, and appendicular skeleton, which includes the lymph bones, joint articulates, that is the connected one, 2 or more bones. Forensic anthropologists study the anatomy of 200 plus bones of adult and sub-adult skeleton in order to glean as much information as possible from extremely small fragments. In addition, they must be familiar with the morphological variation of the skeleton among the individuals and population. Bone is a viscoelastic material, meaning it has both rigid and flexible properties. Approximately 75% bone is inorganic, consisting primarily of minerals such as calcium and phosphorus that give bones its rigid strength. However, bone cannot be too rigid or it becomes brittle or break upon impact, much like glass. Thus, nearly 90% of organic component of bone is composed of collagen, which provides some flexibility. Further, bone consists of 2 structural components, compact bone and spongy bone. Compact bone is very hard, dense bone and withstands stress, provides strength, resistance and protection. The outer cortex of a bone is composed of compact bone. The spongy bone is porous and consists of bony spicules or tubercular that form a lattice work to absorb the distributed stress and is found in the interior of the bone. A base rule of anatomy is that forms or follows the functions. Indeed, the structure and morphology of bones are well adapted for their functions, including the support and movement of the body, protection, vital organs, hemopoiesis, that is the blood cell production, and the mineral storage. A closer examination of bone architecture will help in demonstrating the relationship between the form and functions of cortical and spongy bone. A long bone is divided into three sections, that is the diaphysis or shaft, two or more epiphyses located at the end of the long bone, and the metaphysis, a section of bone between the epiphysis and diaphysis. A layer of tough connecting tissue known as periosteum envelops the outer cortex of the diaphysis, while the medullary cavity is lined by endosperm. Long bone functions to produce the blood cells inside the medullary cavity, provide the structure to the body, and act as levers for movement. Accordingly, the outer cortex of the long bone consists of a very thick cortical bone to protect the medullary cavity and supports the body, while spongy bone is concentrated in the metaphysis and epiphysis as more stress occurs at the joint. In contrast, the short bones such as those of wrist, that is carpals, and ankle, that is tarsal, function to distribute stress and hence have a relative thin cortex and considerable amount of spongy bone. The flat bones of the skull consist of outer and inner tables of compact bone, that is considered the protective function that provides the brain, and a layer of spongy bone in between. By applying the principles of skeletal biology, forensic anthropologists have the skill to interpret the story bones till for the purpose of identification. The identification process begins with inventory of available skeletal element and other evidences present. The next step is to reconstruct a biological profile of the individual that can be compared to the missing person. Finally, a description of any pre-mortem and post-mortem traumatic injuries is required. Now, let us summarize what we have learned in this module. Anthropology is the scientific study of the origin, the behavior, and the physical, social, and cultural development of humans. Anthropologists seek to understand what makes us human by studying human ancestors through archaeological excavation and by observing living cultures throughout the world. Identification is more often problematic forensic cases because the next of kin may not be available to view body, or if injury, dismemberment, or post-mortem changes that exaggerate emotional response or that obscure the identifying feature may make visual identification or use of other techniques such as fingerprints unreliable or impossible. Significance of anthropology are determination of species. The bones should be stored out into human and non-human bones. Determination of age, the appearance of union of centers of bones, the growth and certain other changes of the bones and teeth helps an investigator in determining the age of individual at the time of death. Determination of sex. The adult skeleton has several morphological differences between the different sexes which are utilized to determine the sex of the individual. Determination of race. Bones have certain morphological and characteristics which are confined to the individuals of a particular race. Based on these, racial group to which the individual bones belongs can be arrived. Next is the height. The height of the individual can be calculated with reasonable accuracy by applying formula to the length of the individual bone, especially the long bones of limb.